When we get to concept sketching, there's always a little bit of panic in some students' eyes because they think to themselves, "Oh my God, I can't sketch. I'm a horrible artist." And that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly natural. I will remind everybody that anything you do in life, whether it's learning to read or riding a bicycle, you really suck at it the first time you do it. However, with a little time and a little bit of practice, you get better. So that is exactly the same thing that will apply to concept sketching. With a little bit of time and a little bit of practice, you will get better. So, concept sketch in its simplest form is a graphical representation of an idea used to quickly communicate design intent and details. The important part there is it should be relatively quick to make. This is not something that's a finished piece of art that you work hours and hours and hours. You want to put just enough detail to communicate what you intend with the design and any details that you would like others to know about it. There's no one right way to make a concept sketch. There are many ways. It depends a lot on what you're trying to get across, what your design intent is, and who your audience is. Maybe you are sitting in a restaurant and you're passing a napkin back and forth with a friend, bouncing ideas off one another, and you just do all the little scribbly marks. Um, Maybe you're going to have to go in front of a audience and ask for money, and so you want to make sure your presentation looks a little bit more professional and polished. So maybe you'll add some marker renderings to make your sketch pop and stand out a little bit more. Maybe you are doing an entire assembly and you need to add that into your engineering notebook, and it's only for you, and you just need enough detail so you know what you are trying to design. Sometimes your sketches can even look more like CAD drawings. Here we have a section view of some device, and it's important to know how it's working on the inside. So they've made what looks almost like exactly like a CAD section view. That's also an example of a sketch. A lot of students get really upset because they say, my drawing skills are not that great. As long as you can get the idea across, that's all that matters. All right. You want to take your time, you want to do your best. But I mean, this is an architectural rendering. Sometimes getting down 10 really rough ideas like this one is better than one fully polished, looks great, because you have 5 different ideas. And maybe from there you choose the best one and then go and develop further polished sketches from there. So the amount of detail you include in a concept sketch changes depending on what your audience needs or what you need. You'll see here it's the drawing for, or the sketch for, the first accessible snowboard. So if you're unable to stand with a traditional snowboard, you're unable to ride it. This designer created a device that allows someone who is unable to walk, they are still able to enjoy snowboarding. So we have this large sketch here, shows the outline and the form and the general intent for the accessible snowboard. And then you'll notice with less detail and smaller, various different other ways that you can um, use this device, modifications to this device, different ideas. So the idea is a snowboard to allow disabled people to ride it, but we have different ways of sitting in it. In this one here, they are sitting, and this one they are kneeling. This one has a little bit more laid back configuration, and this one has more of a knees up configuration. Concept sketches can also be very, very polished if you need it. This sketch has had shading done to it. They've also colored the thread, because in this design the path of the thread is very, very important. You'll notice that they have a couple of notes, and that's also something that you can add to every single sketch that makes them easier to understand is what's called annotations. So here's the word here, annotations. Adding annotations, which is a note with an arrow drawn to what you're referring to, is very handy for sketches for getting your point across. So here we have some examples of concept sketches from an engineering notebook. You'll notice that they are very, very different, and they have very different levels of detail. You'll notice that the geese have different modifications made to their neck depending on what that geese is supposed to be, or goose is supposed to be illustrating. We have geese that are sleeping. We have geese that are eating. All modifications, all different variations upon the same idea. You'll also notice we have some colored. We have, this one's kind of is done in a traditional top view, front view orientation, just like a regular drawing. It just happens to be in pencil. So now it's your turn, okay? Use the sketching tips guide and sketch a tape dispenser. So there you have this item here. There's a few in my classroom. You're free or welcome to grab those and use those. If you have a tape dispenser of your own, by all means, go ahead and sketch that. Do not trace the image. That is not my intention. I don't want to see anybody holding up the piece of paper to their computer screen. And right now we're only doing the outline, okay? So you are only outlining and not putting any shading in right now. So hopefully you're a better drawer than I am, but take your time. It's very important to use very light sketching right now. Do not go in and make very dark, heavy lines. You don't want to make dark lines that are difficult to erase. You want to use very, very light lines, okay? Because those are easy to erase. It's also, instead of trying to do one line all the way across like I just did there, if you do several, all right, and this is being done with the mouse, so it's terrible, but if you do several, then you can go, oh, okay, there's the one I want. That's the one that looks the most closely, and then since you did them lightly, you can go ahead and erase those, all right, the ones that are extra. Now you have a nice outline of a tape dispenser. So now we are going to work on shading it. Shading is important because it makes it appear more realistic by giving it depth and contrast. When you look around the room, you don't see the outline of an object. You see the shaded image of an object. So by giving your concept sketches a little bit more detail, it makes them appear more realistic. This is completely optional, but if you want to buy some artist pencils, once again, completely optional. It is usually easier to shade with a softer pencil. Now, if you look at your standard school pencil, they always say use a number 2. That's also called an HB. It actually stands for hard black. So if you have a number 2 HB pencil, that falls kind of in the middle between soft and hard. If you go and buy like a 4B or a 6B, your pencil lead is softer and you get a little bit, it's a little bit easier to shade. So after you've created a line drawing, you can make a value scale. Now that's what's pictured at the bottom here. A value scale shows your pencil in different gradations. So you'll have a box and it's the darkest and it's a little bit lighter, and then a little bit lighter, and a little bit lighter, and a little bit lighter until you're all the way to white on your paper. You don't have to use the entire value scale every single time. It depends on your object. So if we look at the tape dispenser, it has a black body. So probably, like we lined in blue here on this slide, values that are darker are going to work better for a dark colored object. As bright as the sun is, your black tape dispenser is never going to be fully white in appearance. It's always going to have some color to it. All right, but your lighter color objects like your white center round axle that holds the tape in place, That may be from light gray all the way to white when there's a reflection on it from the light. Very few items will require the darkest I can make to the lightest I can make. And it's important when you get to the darkest areas that you do not press so hard with your pencil that you turn it all glossy and shiny. This should not be shiny. It should not be shiny. If you went too far, if you go to where these darkest values are shiny. So step number 2, locate your light source and make a mental note. Okay, think about the middle of summer when you're at your house or in your yard in the morning. The sunlight goes in a particular way. You get long shadows in the morning. The light is different than the light you see, say, at noontime. At noontime, the shadows are right underneath whatever object they are or close to it. And then as the sun goes along the day, that shadow changes. So you get to pick a virtual location for your light source, and then as long as you keep that in mind, you can start saying to yourself, where would this object be the darkest? In this case, the sun can't shine on it, so it's now the darkest. The lightest is going to be this one on top because it has the most exposure to the sun. And this side gets a little bit of sun, but not very much. So areas closest to the light are lighter, areas further from the light are darker. It's very simple. So step 3, apply shading to your sketch. All right, refer to your subject frequently to compare it with your sketch. You will note here, their sun, their light source is at the top, and so therefore these surfaces here are very well lit. You'll even notice that because the sun is shining down on it, there's no shadow in this area, or very little shadow, but you will notice that there's shadow here in this area, very dark in this area, extremely dark where the sun can't really even get to it, and then slightly lighter here, but still in shade. So go ahead and pick where your darkest areas are, and then go ahead and go to light. I find it easier if you start dark and go to light. You may be a little bit different, but that's what works for me. So this is one artist representation of the tape dispenser with shading. The tape dispenser is black in color, and so what are your darkest values? The tape dispenser itself, right? The darkest values are used for the tape dispenser. It's black. The transparent tape, all right, is very light in color. Technically it's clear, but you still have, if you look at tape from the side, there still has a color value there, and they have applied it here, and you'll notice that it's very, very light. You will also notice that if the sun is here, all right, that you have your hot spot in this area. You'll notice that this is the hottest spot, the lightest area of the tape dispenser, but it's not completely white because your tape dispenser is black. These areas are very, very dark because they're away from the sun. There's not much sunlight hitting them. But there's a round, you'll notice that it looks round because the sun is actually shining on this edge, and then as it rolls around, it goes into this dark area here. All right, that gives us the indication that top is actually rounded. So concept sketch, your turn. Take a moment, hit pause on the video and sketch this car. If you're in my class, I think I have a few of those. It may not be the exact car. There's a truck and a couple of more Automo blocks. You're free to use those. But sketch this. All right, you're going to start with the outline first. Remember that. So here you have your outline. All right, what it looks like without shading. You'll notice that all the lines are roughly the same value scale except for your construction lines. You have these light lines here. Those are perfectly fine. You can leave those in there. You don't have to erase them, or if you're very clean, you want to erase them, okay, for sure, go for it. But those are construction lines, and remember, they're very, very light, and then once you're done, you can go back and color in darker the object lines. So here's the car with shading applied. You will notice that the darkest values are in the wheels inside where the sun doesn't shine. So your sun is coming from above, all right, and slightly off to the side. How do I know it's slightly off to the side? Because look at this value here. The edge of the spoiler is a little bit hotter than everything else. But we know it's coming from the top because we have this entire section here that's the top section, and it's nice and bright. You'll notice here that the body is not flat. They've given a little bit of contour, and you can see that this section is exposed to the sun and this section is exposed to the sun in a slightly less amount. So that I know that if I look at that from the side, it's probably doing something like this. You have to make the judgment call on your own to figure out, if this is my sun, where's my light coming from, and then adjust your shading accordingly.